How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Brought me life. I know boast in anything. No gifts, no power, no wisdom. But I will boast in Jesus Christ, His death and resurrection. Why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give an answer. But this I know with all my heart, His wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give an answer. But this I know with all my heart, His wounds have paid my ransom.
Almost timed it well.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me.
Those online, what do you think this means? Keep it going? Start? Well, welcome to the gathering. We're glad that you are here to worship with us. Whether you are in here in the chapel in person or joining with us online live, I invite you, make sure to make your presence known in the chat. Especially later on, we'll have a discussion with the text, and you can contribute your own part of the discussion there. If you are watching later in the week, you can still participate in that ongoing conversation because theology is always ongoing in the comments section down below. You can find in the little drop-down section ways to give, ways to connect through Calvary Connect, and ways to be a part of the Calvary community, whether it's at the gathering or at the larger church. We have, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a different format than our stereotypical sermon and song, in that we're going to have some more call and response and discussion during the sermon period. So I really invite you to engage and to prepare your hearts to participate in that. We tried something kind of similar last week, but we were in the round just to see camera angle-wise how that would work. And from what I heard, it was a pretty neat experience, especially for those who are gathered here. So we may try that again in the future, but for now, we're going to keep trying new things. So grateful for those opportunities to continue to be the hands and feet and worship together. Speaking of worshiping together, I invite us to stand or rise in body and spirit, wherever you are, unless you're driving, and let us sing together. Hey, you know what? It's new again, so we're going to go back. And I'm remembering that I had another thing to do, so I'm going to do that. We're trying this new thing for the next couple weeks, and it's so new that I forgot about it. We're framing the service, and we typically do this around the scripture anyways, but we've chosen a verse or two from that scripture that's coming up to set everything in motion. So this week, you'll find it on the screen, and we'll read it together after the next song. But for now, just hear it and contemplate it as we sing. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. Now, let us continue in worship and sing. see the light.
Arise, my soul, remember this. He took my sin and he buried it. No longer I who live, now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. No, I won't boast, but in the cross that saved my soul. All else is lost. This grip of fear has no hold on me. So where, oh death, where is your sting? No longer I who live, now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. Oh, have it all. All of this for your glory. All of this for your glory. Have my thoughts. All of this for your glory. Take my hands. All of this for your glory. Yeah, all of this for your glory. Jesus, all of this for your glory. No longer I who live, now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. All is for your glory. All is for your glory. Oh, have it all. All is for your glory. Yes, all is for your glory.
I would now invite us all to read together the scripture found on the screens. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. I don't know about all of you, but growing up, scripture memorization was encouraged, to say the least. And often it was just, little snippets, just enough to kind of dwell on throughout the day. I hope that this can be a semblance of that you can take this home with you, and throughout the week, you can reflect not only on the verse in the service as a whole, but maybe you can carry this around. Try to memorize it yourself. Let us continue in worship by singing Forever Rain.
to your arms. I run to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. 'Cause nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I run to your arms. I run to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. 'Cause nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. Jesus, my heart will sing. No other name, Jesus. Jesus, my heart will sing. No other name, you are worthy. Jesus, Jesus, my heart will sing. No other name, Jesus. Jesus, my heart will sing. No other name, Jesus, Jesus.
Now for a reading from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. But there will be no gloom for those who are in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you, as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this.
Thanks, Sarah. You have two Sarahs coming to you today to speak. I joked that she spelled her name incorrectly, and she correctly reminded me that hers is biblical and mine is not, so hello and good evening. Well, I already said good evening, but hello. Hello to people virtually. Hello to people gathered here in person. I am here to talk with you today about this text, but I'm hoping this is going to be more of a conversation. That's really what I planned for. I don't plan to talk at you for a long time, so this will not be very painful if you're able to speak back to me. So I'll just preface us with that now. And that goes for you guys who are virtual as well. If you're live with us, we'd love to have you pop up and converse with us in the chat. If you are not live with us, you're always welcome to leave a comment and start commenting back and forth to one another. Please don't troll me, but outside of that, please comment as much as you want. So yeah, I'd like us to kind of dive into this passage together. When I read this, I giggled to myself a little bit because it's a really familiar passage to me in a lot of ways, especially when we get down to the end where it talks about, for unto us the Son is born, right? I don't know about any of you, but growing up in church, that was always read like Christmas Eve, Advent. And I was like, cool, I'm preaching Advent. And then I looked at the calendar, I was like, it's not Advent yet. So I got a little confused. But for those of you who didn't know, today is Christ the King Sunday, which, just as a fun little aside, this can also be a really fun passage to talk about with that, because Christ the King is really celebrating that reign of Christ. I learned a little bit of trivia that it was actually established in the early 1920s during one of the world wars to remind people that God was in control, not what they were hearing from the Nazis. So, feels pretty appropriate and familiar, again, in these times to really talk about what does that mean to have hope in the reign of Christ versus what we're seeing now. I was joking with Morgan earlier. I have a touch of ADHD, so I got some notes in front of me. So if we're looking at this as a whole, this is ultimately a vision and a prophecy from Isaiah. Now, whenever I think Old Testament, I hate talking about the Old Testament because I almost failed like the history of Christianity, and I have a hard time keeping track of all the names. So I'm going to do a quick and dirty context for you, which basically means when Isaiah prophesied about this, there was war, there were a bunch of sieges, there were some rulers that I don't remember the name of but were bad, there was chaos, there was a lot of destruction happening. And that's the context for which Isaiah is talking to us today. We start there when he says there's a people who've been walking in darkness, right? That darkness is referring to all of the chaos that's surrounding them. And I think what I'd love for us to do is to converse kind of through the passage together, right? We see later in the passages, and I'm sitting because this feels more comfortable to talk to each other, right? We see later in the passage this contrast between the rulers of the time trying to establish this sense of peace, and I use that in quotes because it clearly wasn't working, right? That's grounded in human wisdom, that's grounded in leaders trying to make peace treaties, negotiate, make alliances with people on earth. And people are fallible, and people are not perfect. And it led to just more oppression, more domination, more war. And you see that contrasted with the very end of the passage, where God establishes this reign through a child and has a vision for peace that's grounded in justice, in righteousness, in heavenly wisdom that's not something that we know. So I think I want to open our conversation up just around these first couple verses to start us with. And I'm going to warn you now, my occupation is chaplain, so I'm practicing sitting in silence, and I'm going to acknowledge that I'm going to ask you guys a heavy question off the bat. Please still engage, don't be scared. So I want to hear, with that context, where does this passage feel familiar in our lives today? What is your experience of darkness in where we are currently? I'll toss you a mic when you're ready to share. I'll take this. Yeah. Sorry. I forgot the plan for mics.
There isn't a plan. You're fine. Cool. I think the reason this is hard for me is I don't feel like there's peace. And not just because I have tiny humans who never are still, but I do think that adds to it. Like, if there is an aspect of our lives that can't be quieted, I know for me that makes it harder to actually have a concept of peace. And it also addresses the fact that I have less of a reserve to see what's happening in the world, or it's been a heavy week for our congregation, and to be like, yeah, let's do some peace work and let's believe in this. And so while it's nice, and I don't know if this is a great thing to hear from a pastor, but I don't know how it applies. I think it's one of those things where I'm like, I sure hope it's true. Like that hope, peace, joy, love, the light of Christ are all possible. But in seasons when it feels like it's very bleak, it feels like niceties that sometimes feel like the church is patting me on the head and saying, way to go, keep trying, kind of thing. But if I'm not in that bleak space, then it's really that place of how do I, like if I can't see it in the world, how do I be it in the world? And then it feels like a charge, and when the world feels very out of control, well, I can't control peace or love, I can contribute to those things. And that's, I guess, where the hope comes for me.
For sure. And I think what is helpful about you getting us started, thank you for that, is one of the familiar things about this passage, right, is that context of darkness, right? I'm sure that the time in which this was prophesied, there were a lot of people who felt really similarly, that I don't see where there is going to be peace. I don't see where there's going to be hope. And I think we see in a lot of like the Psalms and a lot of the prophets, and even in like the work I do at the hospital as a chaplain, right? In order to get to places of peace and hope, we have to be able to name the dark things, right? So I appreciate that sense of, I don't know where I see hope, and I want to open it up. I know it feels really, and we'll talk about this in a second, but vulnerable to talk about dark things, because I think if you think about a sense of darkness, and if we're thinking about the imagery, I love that the Isaiah's prophecy is in a poem, because my English major heart soars and goes, let's interpret this, it's great. But if you think about that image he uses of people walking in darkness, I don't know about you guys, but I went to college on a campus that was very wooded with very few lights. And there was a lot of times where I was really scared walking across campus, and it had less to do with knowing that my campus was unsafe and more to do with the fact that I couldn't see beyond what was in front of me, right? The darkness makes us feel really isolated and alone, and honestly really disoriented and fearful, because we can't see. We can't see what's ahead. We can't see sometimes even what's right next to us. And so I guess my question moving us forward with that is, what are those things in your life that kind of create that darkness or create those feelings of fear? What are those things for us?
Well, so I really think, though, anyway, like this, with this COVID, though, that it's, I felt like there's not much hope, though, in life, the way this just continues on, and I keep praying and praying that it would end soon, and then that, and then, so some people were saying, though, too, though, like, in order to go to Cherry Creek Press, we're saying around the church, though, that it's one way that the governor is trying to, or the government is trying to control our lives. It's I think, to me, that it's bringing in evil and communism, and then that, when the government's trying to control our lives, and especially when they asked the churches to close last year, though, we're not able to worship together, that's an example of pure communism there, though, and then that another thing, the two, though, is like, with having, made the economy go bad, though, and then now we're having skyrocketing inflation, though, which is putting when you feel like there's just not any hope left in the world. Though, and matter of fact, I'm glad I'm 66 years of age, be 67 here in a little more than a couple of months, though, and then glad to have only have maybe possibility of another one more decade or so left in my life, though, because I'm anxious to go to be with the Lord. That, because I don't like what's going on in the world nowadays.
Absolutely. I see a hand over there. And while you're passing the mic, I'll say, I think you're not alone. I think COVID has made a lot of people really fearful and isolated. And there's been a lot of consequences of that have created a lot of darkness in the world for people. Thank you for sharing.
I think the imagery of darkness really relates closely to misinformation. And I think we've seen an abundance of misinformation in the last 5 years plus. Public lying, public misrepresentation, all kinds of things like that. And I think that's one of the things that the writer of this passage had in mind.
Absolutely, that, the chaos that's caused from not knowing what's happening, right? Whether it's deliberate misinformation or unintentional misinformation, there's a lot of ways we get misled and confused. Sure.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've been struggling a lot lately, I think it's a lot of what's being said already, but it's kind of like I don't see an end. I think I was hopeful for a long time, but I think it's also the tearing apart of families. And we're struggling right now just because of this week. We're traveling. We have unvaccinated family members. We have children who are not old enough to be vaccinated. Well, one has one dose, but not her second. But, it's hard because you don't want to be the person who is standing up for yourself and your family and tearing your family apart at the same time. And it's just a challenge. And I think that's contributing to a lot of darkness in my life personally right now. But yeah, so.
Absolutely, and thank you for being vulnerable with that, because I think there's probably a lot of people who can relate to those feelings of wanting to. We've talked a lot at the hospital, right? I had two thoughts while you're speaking, but we've talked a lot about at the hospital about everybody has their own level of risk tolerance and what they're willing to risk, right? So how do you stay true to your own level of safety and well-being, but still maintain relationships when people have a different level of risk tolerance? There's so much there that's kept us divided and isolated. And I think the other thing that you mentioned that's so important is there's no end in sight, right? There's so many things that we're able to say, well, this will end, or if I can just get to May, if I can just get to X date, then it'll be done and I'll be good. And I firmly believe this will end eventually, but we don't know when. And so it feels, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, so it feels like it goes on forever when we don't know. Absolutely. Yeah. What about other folks? Are there things that are present for you guys right now, contributing to your own sense of darkness in the back? Sorry. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, I remember, I guess I have to be really grateful because I think back to the darkest point in my life was probably about 5 years ago. My husband had just passed away, and then soon thereafter, I lost my job. I was kicked out of my apartment. I was homeless for about a month and a half. It was absolutely awful. And every time, I was at a point where I figured, hey, if this is what the rest of my life is going to be like, I don't want to be here. But fortunately, things I was strong enough. I said, no, don't give up, because I think there was a part of me that was stubborn that just said, no, I'm not gonna let these people that I see as being haters, that would be too easy for them. I would make it too easy for them by doing that. No, and I persevered, and it just seemed like things gradually started to get better. And then I remember sitting. It was, even though I'd been sick the night before because I got food poisoning, but I was sitting there on Thanksgiving Day. My roommate was visiting his family, and I didn't want to go because I wasn't feeling well. So I was just sitting in my room watching TV. But I was also, at the same time, I was thinking, I'm really actually pretty happy today. This was in November 2018. I'm thinking, I'm got a stabilized place to live. I'm working. I'm playing a lot. I'm really thankful, and I remember that was a really good feeling. And so every time things kind of look down or I start to get frustrated or whatever, I try to think back to that time, and it kind of helps me stay, kind of helps me kind of get rid of the blues, I guess. Anyway, thanks.
Absolutely. And I'll say I love what you just said about, I was just so stubborn that I wasn't going to give in that moment, right? Because there are times, and I think each of you have named this, who've shared, where you cannot see the hope at the end, right? You cannot see where this is going. And it takes you being either really grounded in something or really stubborn to hang on through those moments and say, I'm gonna hold out to see what comes next. So I appreciate that lean into stubbornness a lot. I relate to that too. Yeah. Are there other folks? Anyone else want to share? Oh, no, thank you for sharing. I think something that's so valuable about a format like this, right? We're still grounded in Scripture and walking through Scripture, but hearing the stories of other people, I think that helps us sometimes to diminish some of the darkness, to know that you're not alone in it, right? To know that you're not by yourself in all of these dark feelings of isolation and fear, right? So I'm all for, I'll even wait a second and see if anyone else would like to share. Do we have anybody online who said anything? Okay. Online people, I'm looking for you. Yeah, so that's the other thing about me. I love theology, but I like practical theology that's real grounded in our experiences, right? And so I think it's important for us, like I said, that's why I wanted to start here and name what is the dark thing right now. And maybe if you didn't feel comfortable with that, maybe something rose to your mind that you didn't want to say out loud, and that's okay too, but holding on to that while we continue the conversation. And actually what Holly shared is going to kind of transition me into what I want to talk about next is how do you as people hold on and wait for what comes next, right? Because we're going to get to the end of the passage that talks about what God's vision for peace is. But the people who were hearing this from Isaiah at the time had no idea whether that was coming in their generation or not, right? And while we talked about how all of those people in Isaiah's time had war and all of the crazy geopolitical things that were happening at the time, I'm sure they also had all of the same personal darknesses too, right? I'm sure they were touched by the death of a loved one. I'm sure that they had their own family conflicts. I'm sure that they had their own personal struggles that add to those moments of darkness, right? And so they didn't know whether Isaiah was talking about, oh, before I die, there's going to be a king, a human king that comes along and makes us better. Or is this talking about some future time that I'm not going to get to see? Or some time that's really just a vision and doesn't really have anything concrete. And so I want us to think about what do you do in those moments when you've named what the hard thing is? How do you hold out for what comes next? What does that look like for people?
Thanks. So I know I have a lot of darkness, but I also have some light.
We're all made up of all of it. You're good.
Humor. No. But I mean, I think it's just thinking about this time of year, and when you started it, Sarah, and saying, you know, this is like an Advent thing. I thought that too when I had to like practice, and I was like, wow, this is kind of like Advent, but it's not quite Advent. But I think it's like, I mean, it is Thanksgiving, and I think it's focusing on the things we are thankful for, you know, and I think it's, you know, I'm stubborn too. So I think it's, you know, praying a lot. I mean, I know that I have been praying a lot, you know, and just trying to take those quiet moments. It's hard in those quiet moments because they do feel dark, but I think it's important to sit with it a little bit. And I also think, you know, it was interesting because looking on Facebook, which I'm trying to get out of, but a lot of people have been putting their Christmas decorations up early. And we actually talked about doing it early a little bit too, but I'm like, no, I'm gonna hold out. It's not Thanksgiving yet, so we can't do it until this weekend. But I think seeing that it's that hope, you know, that comes with Christmas and with Advent and the light that represents. And I just love that. You know, this is the darkest time of the year, but the lights make it brighter. And so I think it's just like focusing on that part of it. And, you know, I think, yeah, and just being grateful for the things that we do have that we can control and trying to let go of those things that we can't control. You know, staying focused in the moment, which is very difficult, but necessary, I think.
Absolutely. So you're talking about basically the hip research term right now is micro practices, right? Like, how do I find something little in the moment to hold on to, right? Maybe it doesn't feel like overwhelming hope, but maybe the Christmas lights are pretty, and that is what I focus on for today, and that's okay, right? What else?
Something that you shared earlier, I think really applies, which is when we share together like this, we know we're not alone. And sometimes that can feel like, well, who's going to help us if we're all going through it? But if we're all going through it, then we're not alone, which means we can also collectively work for the light and for the hope. And I think sometimes the way that has manifested as of late is leaning on, I know as like a new parent, I hear external voices way more than I trust my mom gut. And that has, I mean, man, you don't want to screw up the tiny humans. They didn't ask to be born. Like, you brought them into this world, and you're like, please don't make me like screw their life up, right? They'll go through plenty of therapy. I don't need to add to it, right? And so one of the things I really had to trust is the Spirit's movement within. And that often comes to that gut check. I think sometimes the Spirit should be fancier or greater wisdom. And yet the most consistent way the Spirit has guided me is through that gut check. And if I'm trying to find light, sometimes the only thing is to trust the internal wisdom that already resides. And yet I don't feel equipped or fancy enough or holy enough to say, hey, but I listen to the Spirit. But I trust that if we truly are made in the image of God, that internal wisdom can guide. So it might be hey, so-and-so's been on my mind lately. I probably should give him a call. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be grand. But I think I have to continually remind myself that it's okay to trust my gut. And that maybe God will be present in that work.
Yeah, I love that. The moments of connection, right, are really important. I have a colleague at the hospital who says all the time, Your head is a jerk, because it's where all the thoughts that kind of make you question yourself and stuff live, right? Your heart's an idiot. It'll believe everybody. But your gut is really where those two signals come together and help to guide us, right? I think it's the Spirit really helping us to integrate those two places, right? The head and the heart, that kind of balance each other out a little bit, and you get those gut feelings. What is it that I need to do next? What is it that feels important? What am I being led to? Yeah. What about other folks?
I think in terms of light and darkness, my mom's favorite phrase that I recall and think of her fondly is, "This too shall pass." Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the great advantages of aging, because the more you've aged, the more you have faced moments of little, big, and darknesses, but still here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's unfortunate that we live in a culture that doesn't honor the aging process like other cultures, because anyone who's, I was blessed to have elders. My grandfather lived to be 90. My great aunt Ina was 89, and they were pivotal in my life. And so at times like Thanksgiving and Christmas, we'd always end up sharing stories and listening to their stories of World War I, Depression, World War II, etc. And to remind us, in terms of what am I looking at that I'm giving power over me? If I'm feeling pain, am I going to let that dominate my life? Or am I going to say, okay, there's the pain talking, and I also want to come to the gathering tonight. So here we are. So I just, in my own life, I can look back on times of great darkness and think, this too shall pass, and it did. And I've learned from those times, and I've been able to make contributions in life only because of my darkness. Because I went through cancer when I was 22, I was able to lead support groups for cancer survivors. Mm-hmm. So I try to look on, looking on where's the fertilizer from that matter, and that we can choose. I don't know there's any circumstance where someone hasn't taken it as an opportunity to reach out. And I think that's what we're always called to do. I heard a woman once say that her grandmother said, whenever some lousy thing happened, something good gonna come out of this. And so I think that's certainly the case. And I think that's, again, why memories are helpful at times like Thanksgiving, to think back to, that was a good time. I had some really good times at Thanksgiving that nobody can take away.
Yeah, leaning on that collective wisdom and collective memory, right? You're leaning on that collective wisdom and memory, right, to remind you that there is an end. The other thing I was struck as you were talking about the fertilizer, right? What growth do you see that comes out of this? There's a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People by Rabbi Harold Kushner. And I actually think I've referenced this in a sermon here before, but I doubt anybody would remember that because it was a long time ago. But his 3-year-old son died, and he has this great quote that I use in grief groups all the time, but he talks about how since Aaron's death, he has become a better pastor, a better counselor, a better human being, more empathetic, but that he would trade that all to have his son back, right? And I think it highlights what you're talking about, where we have choice and where we don't. There are some things that the darkness brings that we have no choice over, but we do have choice over what we do once the bad has happened. And I think that's really important to remember. How much time do we have in general? Because I could probably do this for like an hour, and that's not good for anybody's time. 5 minutes? Oh, yeah, we don't have much time. Cool. I was thinking like 20 more minutes. Nice. So let's get to the happier part then. We only have 5 minutes left. Cool. So if we're getting into the end, right, pull out my Bible that's falling apart. We get into the end, the last verses that talk about this child that comes who will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And this verse, right, we interpret it now as Jesus. Jesus has come to be kind of the embodiment of that prophecy, to bring about this vision of God's will, God's hope for us as a people. And he is the light, right? That's not the verse that was quoted, but there's a New Testament verse that goes with today that talks about how Jesus is the light of the world. And so when we think about what that means for us today, right? Jesus as a person happened a long time ago, but left with us the Spirit. So I think about what are the ways that we continue to enact that light in the world, because this passage feels so familiar to me because history is filled with cycles that repeat, cycles of violence, cycles of hope, cycles of chaos, cycles of order. And so I believe God continually works in our world to work towards that vision of hope and peace, right? Has anybody, I almost always reference The Good Place when I preach, but not today. Oh, nice. Not today. I had a different image in mind today, but has anyone in here ever read A Wrinkle in Time? Yes? I'm going to read a little piece of it because there's an image in that book that I couldn't get out of my head as I was reading this passage. And if you haven't read it, it's a middle grade read that's basically a sci-fi epic battle between light and dark, which is why this was in my head. But they're introducing them to the enemy. And it says, the darkness seemed to writhe. And was this meant to comfort them? But suddenly there was a great burst of light through the darkness. The light spread out, and wherever it touched the darkness disappeared. The light spread until the patch of the dark thing had vanished, and there was only a gentle shining. And through the shining came the stars, clear and pure. And then slowly the shining dwindled until it too was gone, and there was nothing but stars and starlight. No shadows, no fear, only the stars and the clear darkness of space, quite different from the fearful darkness of the thing. And the children start to ask, how do we fight against this? What does this mean? Like, we're kids, what do we do, right? And one of their guides says, some of the very best fighters of the darkness come right from your own little planet. Well, who have our fighters been, Calvin asked. You must know them, dear, Mrs. Whatsit said. Mrs. Who's spectacles shone out triumphantly and said, and the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Jesus, said Charles Wallace. Why, of course it's Jesus. Of course, said Mrs. Whatsit. Who else? Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Pasteur, Madame Curie. Their voices rang with confidence, and they began to list Schweitzer and Gandhi and Buddha and Beethoven and Rembrandt. And then they keep going because then they go on a quest to save their dad, and we don't need to get into that. But I thought of that whole scene in that epic, right? Because it points to this idea of where are the pinpoints of light that we continue to see fighting against the darkness in our world, right? And those are always spurred on by the Spirit. They're spurred on by the collective wisdom of the ages. They're spurred on by the vision that Isaiah lays out. They're spurred on by this knowledge that God's hope and will for us is embodied in what it means to work for peace and hope in the world. I'm trying to think time-wise. Okay. Well, then I'd leave us, I think, with one last question to talk about, and then we'll have one question just to reflect on. But I guess hearing all of that, and to try and end us on a lighter note than where we started, where do you see light winning out over darkness today? And I know we started in a really it's hard to see any kind of hope place. But as you think about it, and think about it in a broader context in the world, where are those moments where you see light winning out over darkness? And if you don't know, that's okay. Okay.
I would say tonight is light winning over darkness. In that who am I? You. When we're bold enough to join voice, to know we're not alone, but to also hear each other's wisdom and comfort. I think it's when we choose to remain completely silent, to believe our story doesn't matter, to believe that our struggle isn't worth sharing, to believe any of those falsehoods, that our darkness isn't big enough, or whatever keeps us from speaking. But it's moments like this. And so I'm grateful for you all being part of my light.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I see it in culture. I think culture's often a reason for darkness, but at the same time, I see a light shining pretty brightly. Sometimes the haters, as it were, might see the light as something undesirable because it exposes, and I think we've gone through a lot of exposure to systems that have been put in place intentionally, even if it's slowly, to bring darkness to certain people as opposed to others. And I feel like in that same culture, maybe different people now are trying to bring to light these things so that we can move beyond that darkness into something better and greater. I just think that that's kind of cool in a weird way, that what got us into this mess is also getting us out in the same way that we have that power to dig our own holes and graves and also to get out of them. So
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, you go ahead.
I just want to say something quick. These two little humans, and for all of us with the little humans, but I mean, they're the light. I mean, their resiliency and their just joy, and I know they're pretty antsy tonight, but, you know, they'll just see sometimes that we're down and come and give a hug or a kiss, and I mean, that is the light. So.
I mean, and I think there's a reason that God chose to enact that vision, right, through a child, right? Sent through a child. That innocence and resilience is powerful. And I think to what you were saying too, Matt, right, that exposure piece, to me is really interesting. I was reading somewhere about how oftentimes when we see darkness in our world, we think of this big evil thing, but many times some of that darkness is carried out by good people who are choosing the path of least resistance because it's easy, it's low maintenance, and it maintains this darkness. But light is the struggle. Light exposes. Light, you have to fight to keep a light going. It'd be easier to just let it go out sometimes, right? And so there is a piece of this vision, right, that's work. And when you are depleted and feeling hopeless, it is hard to find the energy to do the work of hope in the world. It's just hard. It's hard to find that. It's hard to, once you found it, keep it going. And I think we all go through seasons of that. But I think recognizing it and naming it is the first step of working towards that. And so I appreciate you guys doing that with me tonight. I think maybe to end us, I'll invite Matt up to play like maybe some music in the background. But I'd leave you guys with a question to think about, right? As we think about this play between light and dark, the struggle to bring light into what feels like a really dark world at the moment, I want you to think about, how do you talk about and how do you embody what that means in the world? And as Pastor Morgan said earlier, sometimes that can be really small things. It doesn't have to be a big, grandiose plan all at once. Maybe it's identifying one small thing that helps me embody what hope means for this season. But as we start to kind of reflect, I want to give us a couple moments to just think about that. Yeah.
Song might be a little jarring, but let us worship.
shore into the waves. You make me brave. You make me brave. And no fear can hinder now the love that made a way. 'Cause you crashes over me, crashes over me. You are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way. As your love, wave after wave, crashes over me, crashes over me. 'Cause you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all. Yeah, champion of heaven, you made a way for all to live.
Hello. I want to thank you guys for gathering with us tonight, and thank you for showing up and being vulnerable in some hard questions. And as we go out tonight, I want to say, may you go knowing that you are not alone in the darkness, and may you find even small hope to carry out with you and to do the work of God in the world. Thanks, you guys.